We're going to be moving on to our next movie, which is Elvis. Elvis, which is the new biopic film about the real life figure Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley, who is in this film played by Austin Butler. This is a Baz Luhrmann directed film. It also stars Tom Hanks, who plays Elvis's manager, Tom Parker, the Colonel Tom Parker. In this film. And with this film, it very much is from the perspective of the Tom Hanks character of Tom Parker, where you kind of see it through his eyes of his relationship with Elvis. And I think, the style of Baz Luhrmann, if you know kind of what he's done in his other, kind of his other feature films. I remember seeing his film Great Gatsby, which was a film, set in the 1920s. But even in that film, it like had Jay-Z who did the soundtrack, so it included like modern day hip hop and everything like that. And the style that the way that Baz Luhrmann did it is kind of similar if you've seen that film in this Elvis film, where he's going to bring a lot of that flair, a lot of those style. And his favorite, he loves that zoom in shot, like with the camera where he pulls all the way back and then zoom all the way in. Even the beginning of this film, it's like, Tom Parker, he's getting rushed to the hospital, and it's zooming in on his like what do you call it, the IV bag, and him on the gurney and all this other stuff. So, Baz Luhrmann is a very visually, pleasing guy. He loves kind of those visuals, loves getting into that, and almost like a music video director. Which I don't think is an insult to say that. I think he still tell a very good story, but he is very much a guy that you really notice has that flair and has that style when he comes to directing movies. And I think he brings that here with this Elvis movie. And I think somewhat that is its biggest strength, and I think it's somewhat of one of its weaknesses. Because when you see Elvis and when he's performing, I think it's great. Like when you see the concert scenes in this movie, those are really, really well done. Those are well done, really, really well. And Austin Butler, when he, is a big standout in this movie, whether or not I think he'll get, nominated for his performance, I think he probably, he more than likely will. I think he deserves it. I think, he carries a lot of, good charisma, charm, when he's the Elvis figure. I don't really know. I'm not an Elvis historian, so I don't know how much of, closely, he is, accurate to the actual portrayal of Elvis. But I did like seeing him on screen, and he was great to watch anytime he was on there. And I think he delivers very well at making this figure interesting to watch. And this movie clocks in around at like close to 2 hours. It's 2 hours about 39 minutes. It's kind of close around to 3 hours. I think some of that, I think the second half of it is better than the first half. I think when you see Elvis in his later years, because like I said, most of the film really is Tom Parker and him meeting Elvis and kind of sweeping, Elvis off his feet of going like, oh yeah, you're super talented, and signing with him. And we'll get into the performance by Tom Hanks as Tom Parker, because I think some of it is, a little kind of, like a caricature or a cartoon a little bit. In some aspects, because in a lot of these musical biopics, you're gonna have the shitty manager, and he's the shitty manager. And in a lot of scenes where he's there, you can almost see like the devil horns and tail, stick out. Like when he's constantly doing things with Elvis, it's like, oh yeah, don't worry, just sign this piece of paper and you'll be a-okay. You know what I mean? You can almost just kind of see it there. What did you kind of think about this film?
Yeah, man, I could give a fuck about this movie. I thought this movie sucked. I was just like, look, y'all. Like, let me just put it out there on Front Street. I'm a black dude. I have no fucking reason to care about Elvis. It would be like me caring about a bank robber that only robbed black banks, like black owned banks. Like, it's just like, why the fuck should I care about this shit? Austin Butler, God bless him. Like I get it. Like if you're offered the chance to play Elvis, why the fuck wouldn't you audition for it? So like, I get it from that perspective, but this needed to be a miniseries because for the few things that I do know about Elvis, as far as like researching, like all the fun stuff about Elvis, they just don't even bring up. So like the fact that Elvis was like a champion, like fucking eater, like like that's never touched on at all. Like I think you see Elvis eat once in this movie. The fact that he was like a big like karate like learn karate and shit, that's never brought up. The
Do they
fact
even
that
do they even bring up like the fried PB and J? I don't think they don't bring that up.
no,
Yeah.
like they like the stuff that I was mildly interested in, they just completely gloss over. And with a runtime of 3 hours, that's pretty goddamn unforgivable. Because there's so much of this movie that okay, so this movie tries to course correct Elvis. Like it really tries to make Elvis more liberal than he definitely was, and that was something I just kept rolling my eyes at. Even having him being like a peeping Presley, if you will, with black people like performing music and doing churching along and having him like go do the whole like oh I'm like oh my fucking god
Catching the Holy
like,
Ghost.
what yeah, I was sitting there thinking like, give me a fucking break. And the fact that the movie goes like, well, he was a Captain Marvel fan, and he has the fucking like thunderbolt around his neck while he's catching the Holy Ghost. Like I was just like, dude, like come the fuck on. Like eye roll central for me. And um, the movie attempts, and I say attempts because it goes, well, he was a fan of black music, but any black musician, especially when it comes to BB King, is here just to prop up Elvis. And that's something that pisses me off so goddamn bad because there's this whole sequence where he's talking to BB King, BB fucking King, and and he's like, oh, I'm struggling doing my music, and BB King is like, basically gives him the Bagger Vance speech. He's like, you're Elvis Presley, you can do anything. It's like, oh my, like, you're gonna have BB King giving like this motherfucker this speech, like that's the only reason the black artists are there, and it comes across so Bagger Vancy, and it made my skin crawl whenever they did that shit. There's a Little Richard performance in here that is like he performs for about 90 seconds and that's it. There's no interaction between Elvis and Little Richard or anything like that. It's just there to go, hey, look, Little Richard, and then they treat him like the Sandman. They get his black ass off set, and it's just like, okay, and it keeps doing that. And I think the biggest, I mean, I could go more into the black music shit, but I think I've covered it enough. But the biggest mistake I think for me is that they had the movie come from Tom Hanks's Tom Parker perspective, because I think if you have it come from Elvis's perspective, yes, it would have come across a little Dewey Coxish, but I think it actually would have lent more validity to the movie to have Elvis tell his own story, maybe as he, is in the middle of an overdose or he's close to the end. I think that would put more weight on the film. But having Tom Parker, who's such a piece of shit, tell this story, it handicaps the story in a sense because you go, can I believe anything you're fucking saying? And two, it just makes for kind of a gross journey, but there's really no resolution between him and Elvis. The movie just kind of ends. So it's frustrating because I think especially in the last, I guess I'd say the last third, the Elvis like comeback special that he does, that's actually really well filmed, and I think Austin Butler does a good job with most of the musical stuff. But again, this is one of those movies where the guy doesn't sing, and that just bugs me because it's like, why are you doing these musical movies if you're casting an actor that can't sing? Like they're doing that whole like we're splitting part of Elvis's like actual recordings over what the actor's doing, and it's like, okay, like if you can't sing, don't star in these fucking movies. And it's like,
I don't know. It's tough. I mean, sometimes you can't always find a guy. I mean, it's tough to find the actors that maybe portrays the character really well, but can't really sing. I know that's kind of tough sometimes.
But I mean, I'm sorry, but Rocket Man was only a couple years ago, and Edgerton did it. So it's like I know Elton John is a different type of singer, but it's like we've seen actors and actresses do this shit and be able to actually, sing. So I understand people are gonna go like, well, Elvis has a unique voice. It's like, okay, well then I don't want to hear this guy get nominated for Best Actor because he's not doing the whole fucking part. And I had the same problem with Rami Malek before anyone asked, but it's really that part is very frustrating just as a viewer. They also gloss the fuck over his wife being 14. Like they don't even bring that shit up. They're just like, shh.
Yeah.
Like they brush past that shit so quickly, and the problem is that in brushing past that, we don't get to know Priscilla Presley like at all until
Yeah.
she goes, "I'm leaving you," and I went, "Oh, you're still here?" Like, all right, like it's just like it. So it doesn't even come across as the emotional beat that it should. It just comes across really hollow. And Tom Hanks, I'll be the one to say it. He's bloody goddamn awful. He should be ashamed of himself because this is a role that I was sitting there the whole time going, John Goodman would crush this shit. If you cast John Goodman in this role,
yeah.
like that's a slam dunk because he could definitely get across that villainy and that like deceitfulness. But Tom Hanks, like, there's a reason why Tom Hanks doesn't really play villains. I mean, did anyone see The Circle? Exactly. That's why he doesn't play villains that often because he's not very good at it. All due respect, I'm a huge fan of his, but he's not good at it. And this is one of those. This is one of those movies where BB King pulls that Bagger Vance speech. Is like, he's gonna screw you over, and he tells him that like early on in the movie, like 30 minutes in. And so then it's another 2 hours of us just watching Elvis basically be a dumbass until, the very last second where the story requires him not to be. So when the movie goes, don't you feel bad for Elvis? I'm like, no, I don't feel bad for Elvis. This is actually kind of on him. It really glosses over the whole Memphis mafia bit too because he has his family there with him, but it doesn't really talk about how they're being bloodsuckers as well. Just as bad as Tom Parker is being. They really gloss over that too. So there's a lot of beats that I'm like, you really need to hit this harder, and you don't, and it really detracts from the film as a whole. I think if you make this a miniseries and you recast Tom Parker, I think you could have something much better here. But for me, honestly, this was such a waste of time for me because at the end of the day, when you're doing one of these biopics, it's like, do you learn something about the artist that you didn't know before? And I left the theater going, I didn't learn anything new about Elvis that I didn't know before. Like it just felt like it felt very much like a hey, Elvis liked black people. See, he liked gospel music. It's like, well, that doesn't mean shit. like that's cool, but it just really felt like a waste of time at the end of the day. I didn't really learn anything about him. So
Yeah. For me, I don't think I'm as harsh as you. I see some of your complaints there. When it comes to, this movie, like I said, it's close to 3 hours, and it's basic kind of Wikipedia search knowledge of Elvis. I think you can find
yes,
it's like,
yeah,
okay, yeah, he was in the army. Okay, he did that. It doesn't really get into any of the grimier kind of elements, like you said, the whole thing with Priscilla, her being 14. I don't know what was the big reaction at the time of her being 14 and him being, because I think when he first started dating her, he was like 22 or in his early 20s, I believe.
that sounds right. Yeah, I think I'm like 22.
So I know that was like if your favorite rock stars from Bowie to the members of the Rolling Stone to members of Zeppelin, there have been instances where a lot of those guys dated teenage girls, who were 15, who were 16, 17 years old. So I don't know at the time what the big reaction to that was of him being with a 14-year-old girl, of whether there's people going like, oh, okay, well, that's just what maybe dudes did at the time. I don't know, but that kind of gets glossed over. And when it comes to another thing with Elvis Presley, he gets brought up in the conversation a lot of being one of the OG musical culture vultures, of being a guy that could profit and could be successful because he was a white guy and he couldn't, black people couldn't play at the same venues that he could play at, and he was able to take that sound that black people had and profit from it. Because of what was going on during that time of Jim Crow laws and segregation laws and things like that. That really isn't really delved into very much of
at all.
That isn't really delved into of how this guy is taking this music and profiting from it. And I don't know if how much of a close relationship he had with BB King. I've seen photos of him with BB King. I don't know what how close of a relationship it was, but here, like you said, it is portrayed as kind of like, it's just shown as like, oh well, hey, he's got black friends, so he can't be racist, he's got
yeah, and there's definitely that element that's gross. I will say,
it's like it's kind of portrayed as that. But yeah, I mean, and then when you mentioned the Little Richard scene when they go and see Little, like he has to go clear his head, like he has to, and then he goes to the black neighborhood, you know what I mean, to hang out at the black club. He has to go clear his head, and they're seeing Little Richard perform. And they're sitting around talking, watching the guy play. And it's almost like in that scene, it's weird because BB King is almost trying to like get him to steal Little Richard's music because he's like, man, you could take his music and you could be way successful and more famous than he ever was at doing it. I'm like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what the fuck? Like, you just giving him ideas like that, and like you see,
that's a gross scene.
Yeah, I thought that was really weird. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the stuff with BB King and all that stuff, like that was just so, I think, pointless in the movie. I think a lot of supporting characters outside, like besides the two leads of Tom Parker, Tom Hanks, and then Austin Butler's Elvis, all the really supporting cast is pretty weak. You don't really get a sense of it in any other really character in this movie. Not Elvis's mother, who I know his mother was a big figure in his life.
And that she's written off really early too.
Yeah, that is completely just done away with. His father, and like you said, you mentioned Priscilla, who was his wife. You don't get a sense of her character at all. She's just kind of just there. It just mainly focuses on the two of them, Elvis and Tom Parker. And when it comes to all this other stuff, like it does have these traditional things of being a movie set in the period of the 60s, because it goes through from the 50s all the way up until the 80s, all the way up until Elvis died, basically. You do have those moments where, you see like, oh, Martin Luther King's been shot. You know what I mean? Like usually in a movie in the 60s that's set in that time period, you're going to have that where it's like, oh, and then everybody sits around the TV and then, watches the news. Or then also when JFK got shot, and then also when, Robert Kennedy got shot, you're going to have those moments. I don't know how actively political Elvis was in those days.
That... People forget he went to like President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, and was like, "I want an FBI badge so I can help wage my own war on drugs." So him being torn up about MLK Jr. being assassinated, I went, I'm like, so the thing is too, he even goes like, "Oh my God, like MLK Jr.'s been shot. He was always right when he spoke," and I went, I fucking doubt Elvis said that.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's what I mean by overcorrecting. Like, the movie is so clearly aware of there will be black people watching this shit, and like, how do we go ahead and make this, how do we make this Sherry Robitussin go down a little easier? And I just went, yeah, y'all, you're not doing a great job with it, and it's frustrating because again, what's the actor, Austin Butler? Austin Butler. I get it, man. Like this guy, he's. You want to get to that next level. I get that, and being offered the chance to play Elvis Presley. Let's be real, white people love them some Elvis. So I get being offered this. You're like, oh my God, this is the role that can take me, to that next level. But the script failed him. Baz Luhrmann, man, it's so weird because I love Moulin Rouge so much, and I even love Australia, even though that movie is way too goddamn long. When you get to The Great Gatsby, that's where I kind of started going like, all right, this gag is kind of starting to run thin, and when he has the Vegas residency, when he has the Vegas residency, I really like that sequence in particular, like seeing him actually like direct the band and all that, because it's the first time really in the movie he feels like a competent musician, which is a really big problem for a 2.5 hour movie, and that's in like the last 25 minutes. It's like, okay, you're actually seeing Elvis direct the band and be like, okay, you come in here, you come in here, and I'm just sitting there going, God damn it, why wasn't this in like his first performance? So we actually see him, grow into this musical icon, which, my feelings about him, aside, Elvis is a musical icon. I can recognize that. But it's really frustrating because we don't like the drug problems that he has kind of just comes in the last third. Like they hint at it once, but then they never touch on it again. Um, him going off to the military, that's done such a like a 5 minute scene where I just went, all right, like
Yeah.
we're brushing past this. Like for almost a 3 hour movie, the amount of stuff that just kind of zooms by, I went, there's a lot of stuff here you could have focused on, and they just don't, and it's really quite frustrating because
Yeah.
I know Elvis did have a more interesting life than what's portrayed here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for a movie with this length, it feels like they don't really go that much into depth into anything. And I
Yeah,
said the interesting stuff is really comes during the second half. We see an older Elvis, and you see him kind of stuck in Vegas, and you see the real tension with him and his manager. That was, I thought, really good.
yeah,
But
that
that,
like there was a couple scenes that were good.
yeah, and that, but that doesn't come until the last 30 minutes, the last maybe 45 minutes. Maybe.
Yeah, it's like the last 30, because that's when so that was the other thing, like he Tom Parker had like all these gambling debts and all this shit, and they kind of touch on that, but it's really not until he gets to the whole like, I'm gonna keep him here, like keep him from going on an international tour, and again that's in like the last 25ish minutes. It's like, damn, this could have been like, you could have woven this throughout, and it really kind of had more weight when it hits this last third. And it's frustrating because again, I kept saying this should have been a 4 episode, 90 minutes a piece miniseries, and I think you could have fleshed so much stuff out and actually made it, a thing.
Hmm.
But Tom Hanks is so miscast in here. He's basically being what he should have been playing Saving Mr. Banks, like except like fat. Like it's so weird. But he keeps calling Elvis like my boy, which I just went, all right, that's weird that you keep
Well,
calling him that.
apparently that's what the real life guy did. That's what he would do. He would call everybody
Oh
like my.
really?
Yeah,
That's creepy. But there is a point where even Elvis's dad, uh so that was something else. I went, this is an interesting thread that you could have developed. Like his dad just kind of goes, well, we're making money, whatever, but he's supposed to be his manager, and Elvis, calls him out in the last 20 minutes on that, like, how am I broke? You're supposed to be keeping track of all this, and they really just brushed past that too, and there's so much of that where I went, this is an interesting thread, what are you gonna do with it? Oh, nothing, all right. And
yeah.
it just kind of keeps doing that, and there was just a point I went, all right, you're only gonna go, like, you're not interested in making an Elvis biopic. You're interested in making an Elvis fluff piece, and uh, like we compare it to something like Rocket Man, where Elton John talked about the fact that I need to be shown that I was an asshole, and and you get to see how much of a prick Elton John actually was, and how Elton John was willing to peel those layers back and let us, as the audience, see him at his worst. And Lisa Marie Presley and Priscilla Presley, they were heavily involved in this behind the scenes, and it really shows because that, like, even anything remotely of like a shaded side, they're kind of like, oh, we're gonna pull that back, and so it comes across more as an Elvis fluff piece than an Elvis biopic.
Yeah. Yeah, and when it comes to biopics now, it's like it's tough because the formula got exposed by Dewey
Yeah.
Cox. Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story
Yeah.
of like the setup, everything of what happens typically in these biopics, the formula. So now, in most of these kind of recent biopics, they've tried to kind of like, okay, what way can we jazz it up and not make it so traditional and like get on up? Like they had it where it was like they told the story out of order and they like these little vignettes and it kind of went around. Talking about his life, and Rocket Man, it was basically a musical about the life of Elton John. And then you did have something more traditional like Strata Compton, but I love Strata Compton. I think Strata Compton is
Same.
very very good.
Yep.
And with this Elvis movie, I think it's definitely better in the recent crop of biopics that we've gotten. It's better than Bohemian Rhapsody. I think it's definitely better than that. Uh,
Okay.
I don't think it's as good as Rocket Man or as good as Strata Compton. So it's kind of just below those things. And like I said, I do really love the performance of this. The performances in this, mainly from mainly I think just I shouldn't say performances. I should say just performance. I think Austin Butler. I mean, he does a good job, and he looks similar to Elvis a little bit.
Yeah, he does.
Has a good swag, especially when they go into his later life and they add a little bit more kind of makeup and prosthetics. It's like okay, yeah. And Elvis is such a figure where it can draw parody because there's so many like Elvis impersonators. He is a big figure in pop culture.
So many.
Where different impressions and everything like that. But I think he does a good job of not making Elvis feel like a caricature. I do like kind of some of the look of the movie when they the style that Baz Luhrmann has, but I think sometimes it could be just too overindulgent. Um, yeah, and then the stuff with Elvis in regards to like his relationship with black musicians and black people in this movie is not good. It kind of glossing over the grimier elements of his life. I didn't really particularly like all that much. But yeah, so all that being said, I would give it maybe just to stream it for me in this, and then also the soundtrack of this movie with like much like I said with Baz Luhrmann did with Great Gatsby, which was like a modern day soundtrack of sounds of hip hop and pop. He does that with this in this Elvis movie. I don't think it really adds to anything in this movie. Like you have like
No,
Doja Cat who's
not
in
at
this, like
all.
what they do like a remix
Oh,
of.
that song is fucking goddamn awful. Like that.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that was rough.
yeah, and I like Doja Cat. I like her music.
Thing.
But I think I was like, what is this? I don't understand what the purpose of this is. I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And like so, yeah. For me, and Elvis is a musician. Thought he was a good musician. I like some of Elvis songs. And I like some Elvis performances. And this movie did make me want to check out some Elvis performances and everything like that. Yeah. So for me, I just give it maybe a stream it, high stream it, maybe. What about you?
Yeah, man, this is on my worst stuff for the year.
Wow.
I'll never watch this shit again. I felt like this is a waste of my goddamn time. Like I was just like I said, I get it, Austin Butler. Like I get it. I get wanting to take that step, and I have to keep hammering that point home because I really do understand that. And I want that to come across. But goddamn, everything else in this movie just felt so fucking hollow. And at the end of the day, I left the theater just going, that's almost 3 hours of my life I won't get back, and I'll never watch this again. I will give a lot of credit to the costume designer.
Yeah,
Um,
that's also very
oh,
good.
I had their fucking name here, and I don't have it now, but um, they did a great job. Like the costume designing is genuinely fantastic as far as like the different outfits that Elvis has. I thought that was actually
Yeah.
really well done. So it's not like this movie is like there's nothing good about it. I thought that was actually well done. Um, and some of the cinematography, especially with the concert stuff, actually does
Yeah.
work. But that's a shockingly low amount of the film, which I actually thought there'd be more concert performances, but there's only like three really big ones. There's like the first one, four. So like there's the first one where he debuts,
Uh.
the one where he gets arrested, the comeback special, and then the Vegas residency. So it's maybe about 25 ish minutes, maybe, of performances. But the rest of it is like the drama bullshit, and that's where I just kind of went, yeah, I don't care. Um, I stand by the fact that if you recast Hanks, I think this is better. because you get less of a, like a twirling my mustache. I'm gonna tie Elvis to the road. Like you get less of that shit. But I just, goddamn. Oh my god, what's below stream it? Remind me. I'm
Skip it.
sorry. Yeah, this is like a high skip it for me. I just
We also do
you
have
can
waste
watch
of
it.
film. We have waste of fucking film. That's our lowest rating.
Ooh, you know what? Yeah, I'm going there. It's a fucking film. I just
Wow.
like because you can watch a compilation of the performances on YouTube, and that's like 18 minutes. You don't need to watch this full almost 3 hour film to get 25 minutes of like good shit. And Hanks, there was just a point where I went, this is on you for being dumb. Like you have your stereotypical black friends telling you this guy is fucking you over, and you're just like, oh no, he's not. And it's just like, well, dude, like what do you expect him to do? So I think this is a high waste of film. I acknowledge how good Butler is in points, but god damn it, I'll never watch this again, and I'm already irritated that Butler will probably get a Oscar nomination over someone who deserves it more. So
Mm.
yeah, this is a high waste of film.
Okay. All right. That's how you feel feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
not a fan.
Yeah. That was Elvis.